Good afternoon, everybody. It is 2 p.m. on the dot, and we're going to be commencing our Canna-Q webinar. My name is Mark Ashton. I'll be your host for today. Just as some general housekeeping, you will be able to submit questions and answer via the Q&A facility. There's the option to either go through the chat or through the Q&A facility. We encourage some interaction. The purpose of this particular webinar is to encourage a discussion around the Canna-Q project, what's happening, what are the opportunities, and the ways to actually partner with Canna-Q. And with that, we're going to go through some of the opportunities that the project offers, give you a bit of a sense of the operating environment, and introduce you to some of the key stakeholders. For those who are unable to join now but would like to get a copy of the recording and playback, we will have a playback facility made available to all registered delegates as well. And we look forward to engaging with you. Please remember to follow Canna-Q via its social media channels, including LinkedIn and Twitter. As by way of introduction, my name's Mark Ashton. I'll be moderating for today. And as a starting point, we're going to be introducing the management team and the transaction advisors for Canna-Q. Maybe if I can start with you, Shabir. Shabir, you are the CEO and MD of this business. Possibly give us a bit of background information to yourself.
Thank you very much, Mark, and a warm welcome to everybody who's online. I hope those who are late can catch up soon. So yeah, to be short and concise for the sake of time, as the managing director, of course, I'm the representative of the shareholders currently in Canna-Q. I'm also a director of the Musa Group. In this way, I sit on a few boards of different companies with multiple business interests within various sectors of the economy. I have a graduate degree in commerce with a major in finance and also postgrad in project management. I've been involved for a long time in the construction sector, having managed multiple projects in both Lesotho and South Africa. We've done, of note, construction, design and build of 102 health centers and clinics for the Millennium Challenge Corporation, which is an American fund. We've also done a design and build of a stadium project and poultry abattoirs, fisheries, etc. So a lot of PM-specific experience, understanding the built environment, including working for the Department of Agriculture for some time and running projects for the Department of Agriculture in South Africa for the provincial Department of Agriculture. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's a summary, a little bit about me.
Nadia, Zara, you represent the transaction advisors from Uzenzela. Would you like to maybe just give some background as to your involvement in the project and some of the types of work that you've been involved in?
Sure. Thank you so much, Mark, and welcome to all of the guests today. Zara and I are sisters, and I'll give you a bit of background about myself and then pass it on to Zara. So my background is in finance and economics, and for the past 10 years, been raising capital in the South African context and been growing out into the Southern African markets, primarily in capital-intensive manufacturing business, with an average capital raise of 53 million Rand, which is around call it $3 million on a transaction. And last year took a very specific decision to specialize within the cannabis sector, went to the United States for a conference, came back and eventually got very stuck into the cannabis sector in transaction advisory and project management for capital raising and offtake acquisition. So that's me. Zara, would you like to take on your front?
Sure, thanks. So yeah, I think you've pretty much summarized a lot of what we do. My background is in, I have a qualification with a BCom law, and I've been involved in various industries from FMCG to mining, education, agriculture. So that primarily in a project development capacity. And then for the past 10 years, been fully engaged in Uzenzela Holdings, where we facilitate access to finance for businesses, primarily in the manufacturing and industrial type spaces. So we do a lot of capital raise, transaction advisory, and on this project specifically, we're here, as Nadia mentioned, on the transaction advisory role.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate the background, the insight into the team involved in this project. We're going to use that from Zara to segue into really the first opening question around this, and that is, why Lesotho? I mean, it's been described as one of the frontier markets out there. It's one of the opportunities. It's one of those markets that doesn't get a lot of exposure, and a lot of people aren't talking about it. But maybe just take us through some of the market sizing and opportunity.
So yeah, before jumping into Lesotho itself, let's look at that, at the market sizing, and this is sort of more on a global perspective. If we look at medical cannabis, Canna-Q is focusing, so cannabis internationally and what's happening worldwide is you're looking at medicinal and recreational, and then medical as well. And we're focusing as Canna-Q in the medical cannabis sector. So that's where the focus is, being primarily your pharmaceutical high THC cannabis. So not the sort of more over-the-counter herbal therapeutic type cannabis. And then if we look at just the sector as a whole, and why cannabis is so interesting at the moment and why so many people are looking at this, of course, is we see a huge boom internationally. So the global medical cannabis market last year was valued at approximately $6.2 billion US. And that's expected to grow to about $56.5 billion by 2025, which is significant. So this is a new sector. There's a lot of talk around it, but still also a lot of uncertainty for anyone that hasn't necessarily engaged much in understanding the industry. There are also some sector constraints at the moment that are being experienced, and those primarily are regulatory, social, and cultural, scientific, and economic. And if we just look at some of those, a lot of countries are still developing their regulatory frameworks, how they go about issuing licenses, what they want to do, and what they want their involvement to be with regards to cannabis. And then that also, of course, impacts and creates this development that's still going on with trade and movements of cannabis. And then Lesotho, and I'll jump into a little bit more about why Lesotho, but Lesotho essentially has a really great environmental and regulatory framework within which to establish a cannabis business. So if we look at Lesotho itself, and what we like about Lesotho and why anyone should be very excited about Lesotho is essentially, this is a country that was a first mover. So Lesotho was the first country in Africa to legalize commercial cultivation and manufacture of cannabis, and really led the way by far in this regard. So at the moment, there's more than 50 licenses that have been awarded in Lesotho, which means that it's great. They already understand the regulatory framework is relatively well established. There's an understanding from business, from government, etc., and that's really making it quite interesting, as well as the fact that Lesotho will already start extracting EU GMP grade cannabis by the end of the year. So way ahead of any other African country in this regard. The licensing that's being issued, and that's gone through a little bit of a change recently, but they're allowing for cultivation, manufacture, supply and distribution, storage, export, and transit within Lesotho for cannabis. And they're also allowing high THC cannabis to be cultivated. So that's really quite exciting. A number of other African countries have recently come on board, but they're still sort of figuring out their regulation. They haven't really been able to achieve much. There aren't cultivators already up and running the way that Lesotho has. So that's really quite exciting. If we look at the environmental conditions of Lesotho, and you can see that little pinpoint on the presentation, it's a very small country. It's completely surrounded by South Africa. However, it's really got great environmental conditions. It's high, it's known as the kingdom in the sky. So it's got a very high altitude, and what that does is it creates an environment for very clean and pure air, which is wonderful for any agricultural activities that are being undertaken. And Lesotho has, for many years, even before cannabis was legalized, has been a great environment for growing cannabis. There's also, ample clean quality water available in Lesotho. And so that, along with other factors, make it a really good environmental condition to be growing cannabis. And then lastly, just, it's a very low cost environment. So labor, water, electricity, all of these factors, which are relatively large contributing factors towards the cultivation of cannabis, are quite low in Lesotho when compared to just about any other country. And so what that does is, of course, impacts the project, giving you, you've got your low cost cultivation environment, but high quality cannabis coming out. And then there's also some favorable corporates and cannabis tax rates that businesses that are involved in the sector can certainly take advantage of. Yeah, I don't want to take up too much time on that, so I think that sums it up nicely.
Before we move into the specific project itself, I say we're encouraging participants to share questions and insights around it. Are there any major, one of the questions that has come through, are there any major differences between the South African tax and cannabis regulatory environment versus Lesotho, or is it very much a similar environment from a regulatory perspective?
So certainly I would say that it's difficult to answer that question just, in a quick way. Each country has its own tax regulations, and Lesotho is by far ahead of South Africa in terms of its cannabis regulations. So we'd have to look at that and make sure that, if you're cultivating in Lesotho, you're in accordance with the tax provisions there. But perhaps one of the other panelists would like to jump in and add on that.
Any other comments from the panelists, or can we move on to the project owners?
Yeah, I think that from a regulatory perspective as well, it's very much understanding that Lesotho has been a lot more progressive in that it allows, or it allowed previously in the regulation for license holders to obtain multiple activities within one license, meaning you could be a cultivator and an extractor. Whereas in South Africa, South African regulation has gone with the decentralized process around license issuance, similar to other countries. So that's certainly one very significant difference. There is an expectation that will change in Lesotho as well, closer to the international standard, but the Musa Group and Canna-Q have achieved a license that prior to any of that regulatory change in Lesotho.
Question that's just come through here as well from Keith. He's looking at it and he's asking about the remoteness of Lesotho in terms of the ability, from a security perspective, and the ability to move goods around. Is there any thoughts around the logistics of that and the remoteness of Lesotho?
I just should try that. All right, Mark, I'll go ahead with that. Look, Mark, the reality is that Lesotho is a landlocked country. It's one of the few, if I'm not the only one, surrounded by one particular neighbor, which is South Africa. So between the two countries, there's an understanding of rite of passage and logistics. South Africa has good infrastructure. Remoteness, if you're looking at the type of product we're dealing with from a security level, I don't think we have a major challenge with its remoteness linked to anything detrimental in terms of security-wise. I don't see us. It's actually an advantageous position to be where it is from logistics perspective, because our airports and delivery and cargo going out of the country, it's a smaller country, and therefore your ability to move out is much easier than it would be in a bigger country.
Yes, and I think
so
then we've also got, the reality that Lesotho is a large contributor to the diamond sector globally. And where you look at security and logistics of the likes of cannabis, you look at the logistics of the likes of a diamond, it's a very similar type of security measure, etc. So the infrastructure is very much there. And I think that's really some of the context that the audience should relate to.
Fantastic, thank you. And I think one of the things about this particular project is that your team has got experience. They've run multiple businesses across the African continent. We've often seen international partners coming into emerging markets, frontier markets like Southern Africa, South Africa. And one of the things that probably sets this project apart to some degree is local knowledge, local understanding. Should we maybe just take us through the project owners and promoters? I mean, who are the Musa Group? What are their involvement with it? And just give a little bit of context to the audience in terms of your experience and knowledge of the region.
All right, thanks very much, Mark. Look, the Musa Group has been in operation since the early 80s. So we've had a business footprint for close to 40 years now. The foundation, of course, of the group was started by my father way back in 1982. So we have some companies in the group that are operational for over 30 years currently. And in 2008, the group acquired the Frasers Group, which is one of our subsidiaries now. And the Frasers Group has been in operation for over 50 years in the territory. So with this acquisition, the group became one of the largest, if not the largest, private owners of land in Lesotho, particularly. So having a diversified portfolio, of course, of business in multiple sectors, namely construction, real estate, retail, FMCG markets, manufacturing and agriculture, we understand business in general in terms of running it in the territory from issues of regulatory framework of the country, taxes, and just how things get done. The culture of each country of doing business in countries differs. And we have a presence in South Africa, in the DRC and in Lesotho. I think from the matrix or the little diagram you see there, those are some of the companies within the group that are operational in those territories. DRC has been a bit of an interesting move for the group, particularly because it's an emerging market. So we replicated some of our manufacturing and distribution of FMCGs in the DRC. So yeah, predominantly we've got head office in Lesotho, which makes our presence in Lesotho very strong. We understand the territory. I think we're some of the leading business corporate companies in the country at the moment. So yeah, I think that's what I can say about the group, Mark.
So it's on to your professional team. So I mean, I think that we've obviously got a framework of the business behind it, but it comes down to the professional team that are actually going to execute on this particular project. Maybe just run the audience through who's involved, who's managing it from a regulatory perspective, who's managing it from a capital perspective, and who's effectively going to make this go from idea to execution.
Yeah, I think one thing I can say, Mark, from just looking at the group's makeup, the profile of the team, actually, we're very proud in terms of the team we've managed to put together. When we embark on a project as a group, we tend to try to make sure that we get the best skill set available for a particular function. Without trying to divulge into too much detail in each company, but I think what's important to note is that for a transaction of this nature, one needs to understand the dynamics very well. And we've found one of the leading companies in terms of transactional advisory services for us, being the Zenzele Holdings, the likes of Nadia and Zara, who are on as panelists. They've done a great job in helping us put together frameworks and understanding around this transaction in particular. And I think it's important that when you put together a project of such a nature, which requires such specific skill sets, it's important that we have the right advisory panels around us. And that's what we've always been doing as a group. Particularly for cannabis, because we're looking at medical cannabis, there's a strong association with with designing a facility that can meet GMP, particularly EU GMP requirements. And we've embarked on working with a very good firm called High Caliber Engineering. They're based out of Cape Town in South Africa. They've worked with some of the larger groups in the pharmaceutical space. So they understand the space, they understand GMP, GAP, and they've been involved quite intricately throughout the early stages of design and currently in terms of establishing a design framework that allows us to establish our GMP. ProMan is a local project management firm that understands the conditions locally. VegTech, of course, is a leading greenhouse manufacturer, design and supply company that is in the territory. They've been doing this for a long time. I think they've got head office based out of Israel. So they understand this particular sector very well. And of course, we've leveraged thought leaders, particularly in the cannabis space, with Prohibition Partners giving us a lot of information in terms of the pricing and the market in general and where it's going. So we've made a lot of, we've done thorough research through researching through Prohibition Partners and the work that they do. From establishing our cost structure, we have a quantity surveying firm, Jankovits van Zyl Quantity Surveyors, based out of South Africa. They're quite a big firm and have been operational for, I think, over 25 odd years. So they understand the built environment really well in terms of cost makeup. We have a great architectural firm called Cube Architects. They're also based out of Bloemfontein, South Africa. In fact, without trying to go through everybody's profile, but we have legal and policy, the team from Adams and Adams, which I'm sure you would understand are a pioneering legal firm, particularly with IP protection. And Tutwa are also focused particularly on policy and international trade. And yeah, of course, that's basically been our team.
Thanks, Shabir. Just before we move on to the actual numbers of this project, there's a question that's come up here around exploitation of the resources inside of Lesotho. And kind of, as a management team, how are you going to kind of ensure that there's going to be a limited exploitation and rather working for the benefit of the Lesotho economy? Maybe you just want to address that quickly.
I can touch on that a little bit, and anyone else can jump in, of course. I think that's a very good question, and certainly something that even the Lesotho government and the Ministry of Health in Lesotho has made reference to. The fact that they're not looking for what typically happens in developing countries and on the continent, where the raw material is taken out of the country and is not value added locally, and all the value adding happens outside, and then a finished good is brought back into the country. So certainly, even at the level of the Ministry of Health in Lesotho, they are looking for value addition to take place in country. So at the very least, drying would have to take place in Lesotho. So you've got your dried products, your dried flour that you'd be selling. There's also extraction facilities in Lesotho that have already been set up. So there is definitely a view to add value to the product in Lesotho and ensure that that benefit is available to the local economy.
Anybody else want to add anything, or would you like to move on to the project itself?
Yeah, all good.
Great. So I think that brings us to, we've got an idea. We know this is a really exciting project that's coming on stream, but maybe let's just take a step back and get a sense of the size of this project. What are some of the milestones? Where is it situated? And just give us maybe a bit of a walkthrough of the project, Shabir.
All right, great. Mark, let me just take you through this slide by starting off with the picture gallery. In fact, you'll notice the three pictures from top right, middle, and bottom left. Those are taken at an early stage. In fact, it looks quite dry, but that's in the heart of winter. As you can see, the team were around the table. They're planning the facility. The total land parcel we're looking at currently, look, we have a license to produce cannabis over 3-hectare plot. So we've got access to, I'll take you through further details as we go further in terms of our slides. On the top left, there's the viewpoint from not too far, I think like 5 odd kilometers from our site. So that just gives you an indication that the site is located just on the brink of the highlands of Lesotho, which Zara touched on the environmental aspects of how clean the area is, the good quality water that we find in terms of site. And that just allows us to produce cannabis in terms of our targeted milestones. Investment to date, Mark, we're sitting on close to 15 million Rand, which is approximately, depending, the exchange rate is just doing some crazy things at the moment, but that's $1 million at the time. And we're looking at an estimated total project implementation cost of 230 million in Rand. I'm not sure, I don't have a conversion immediately on how much that is in US dollars. So Nadia, if you can just help me on that while I'm talking. The 230 million dollars is obviously Rand, sorry, my apologies, is incorporating the expansion of the project. The land available, as you see, 34,000 square meters. We currently have enough water on site at 15,000 liters per hour, which is sufficient, more than sufficient for our plant and in terms of our facility, including expansion. And yeah, our capacity at the moment designed is 4.7 tons per annum. And we're looking at upscaling that to approximately 19 tons per annum by year 5. And in terms of extraction, the bottom right picture, Mark, we've engaged with a large firm called Verve Dynamics. They are based in Lesotho. They've actually established one of the largest extraction facilities of cannabis in the Southern Hemisphere. It's a really large extraction plant. We've been there, we've seen it. In fact, they should be achieving the EU GMP by the end of this year, late 2020, fourth quarter. So we've engaged with them, and we looked at the cost-benefit analysis of establishing a extraction plant ourselves vis-a-vis using them. And I think it made more sense to utilize their facilities. So we're going to be doing some toll isolate and distillate extraction from them currently. So that's where we are in terms of current status. If I take you through our program, Mark, if you go to the next slide, please.
Perfect.
Okay, so the milestones achieved and targeted milestones. I think our goal, obviously, from the start, when we looked at it, the group as a group, we watched, we observed, and we saw what others were doing and what their failures were, and we tried to capitalize on a lot of the failures incurred by the few front runners who started. In fact, there's only 4 operational players in Lesotho as we speak. So we watched and we learned, and we decided that, you know, if we're going to do this, we're going to do it right, and we're going to become one of the leading brands for cannabis in the country, and by that, establishing an EU GMP compliant facility. So we decided to enter the cannabis industry in March 2019 after lots of deliberation within the group. The license application was done in May 2019, and we've got that award in June 2019. It's a 10-year license for 3 hectare, and it's a full operator license, which allows us, as Nali's explained, the various things we're allowed, functionalities we're allowed to do under the license. And the license is done exclusively for export. I think there was a question regarding whether there'll be some beneficiation locally, but it is exclusively for export. So project initiation happened with the establishment of our professional team in July 2019 last year. Mark, on the next slide, please. And we established a design concept in September 2019 with lots of design iterations, and that design concept then went through lots of iterations through our process engineering firm and specialist consultants to establish design development throughout the period from September through to November. In January 2020, we were working very hard on establishing our commercial feasibility and ensuring that we're not really pegging numbers, because the industry is quite tricky at the moment, because many of the input information that we get from the market tends to be different at times, and different, creating lots of ambiguity in terms of our numbers. And we then had to work really hard at establishing our commercial feasibility, and that we achieved that in January 2020. And in March 2020, which was now a month ago, we went to the market. Our transactional advisory team began the process, and we are now at the stage where the milestones to achieve are now off-taker and investor engagement. We're looking at hopefully concluding that between May and July. That is our target. And by August, our target is to reach financial close, August of this year, and begin construction of the facility in September 2020, and have that completed by February 2021. And of course, we're looking at starting our cultivation in the first quarter of 2021. So that's currently our program in terms of what we're working towards, Mark.
I can see quite a few questions coming through in respect of numbers and breakdown of financials. What I'd like to do is just move on to the operational plan. We've got a couple, we'll put together a couple of the consolidated answers around this, but maybe just, Nadia, you want to take us through the operational plan for this business?
Great, thank you, Mark. So in essence, what we're looking at from a Canna-Q perspective is really to cultivate the flower. We're looking at 7,520 plants per crop cycle at GAP standards. We would either cultivate from clone or from seed, dependent on the requirement of our off-takers. And it's really about optimizing the potency and volume requirements that the client has. We would then take it from the cultivation process over into harvesting and drying to a GMP, EU GMP standard, packing to the specification of export markets, and the extraction facility, Verb Dynamics, whom we've already mentioned earlier. So really to get it to an isolate and distillate stage and phase in terms of the product output, we'd be looking at toll extraction. And there we'd be able to do bulk industrial white label isolate or distillate to the purity and packaging specification of our export markets, and then really ship the product out. Currently, there is no regulation that allows Lesotho to consume cannabis, and all product is for export purposes. So it would be very much in line with the importer country requirements, the necessity for different specifications for the imports to be acceptable. Each country having their own special requirements there. So very much looking at a operational plan that will allow us to cultivate to our exporters' requirements, and the export could then go to an importer in the foreign market, who would then have relationships with wholesalers and distributors, or direct to off-takers, end off-takers that then would be either developing the product into a further value-added finished good, or directly to the pharmacies. So it really does depend on who our off-takers are, and part of today's discussion is to understand some potential off-takers and what their requirements might look like.
Great, thank you. And this slide here will take the audience through the investment metrics. Possibly this will answer some of the consolidated questions that are coming through on the Q&A. Nadia, if you want to maybe just take the audience through this breakdown, and then we can maybe halt there and have a look through some of their questions and see how we can answer them.
Sure. So what we're really looking at is over a 5 to 7 year period, we're looking at 100+ jobs being created by Canna-Q, and a cumulative revenue of 6.9 billion Rand, which is approximately $450 million US. The conversions in terms of exchange rate that we've used throughout the model has been done at a 1550 Rand to the dollar rate. And the reason we're using Rand, and you'd hear that quite often, is that the Lottie, which is the Lesotho currency, is pegged to the South African Rand. And whilst there's a significant amount of fluctuation at the moment and volatility in the Rand due to COVID, as well as other international factors, I think we're all very, very aware of what's happening internationally around markets. But there is an expectation that there will be a normalization of the exchange rate back to 1550. So we've kept it there at the 1550. And we're really looking at a 234 odd million Rand investment requirement over the 5-year period. In terms of outputs, we're looking, as Shabir had mentioned earlier, to 4.7 tons in year 1, moving up to 19 tons in year 5. And that's really based on optimization of space and cultivation methodologies. We are then, and interestingly enough, that tonnage is based on conservative numbers. So there is room for improvement, but we are, as Shabir mentioned, with the information that in a new sector like the cannabis sector, with the information that is available, we have gone with a view of being conservative in our numbers as opposed to overly aggressive. And interestingly, that then means that we're sitting with an EBITDA of 280 million rand in year 1 and over R1 billion in year 5 per annum. So a very healthy business, and we're fortunate to have a very good investment case available. So yes, I think that also from a licensing perspective, I see some of the questions around a 10-year license renewals. It is renewable, and interestingly, a lot of the other countries have much shorter license periods. So great advantage to Lesotho in terms of the license period.
One of the questions coming up there, it relates to, do you own the land or is it leased? And what are the kind of restrictions from the Lesotho government perspective?
Shubir, would you like to take that question on?
Yeah, no, the land is definitely owned. In fact, the specific land that we've selected particularly has been in the family for almost 3 generations as we speak. So there's some sentimental value to that specific parcel of land. It's been an icon in the community that it's based by. It's been providing. My grandfather was actually using that piece of land to really give a lot back to the community in terms of free water, access to water, and so there's some sentimental value to the land parcel. So that's owned, and it's owned by the group. Yeah.
Question that comes through: why go the off-taker route if it's a viable project? Was it not an option to look at funding via the likes of the government or land bank? I mean, I think they've got obviously some of their own challenges locally, but why go the off-taker route?
So to answer that, look, fundamentally with any bankability, really you're looking at understanding who your off-takers are, and certainly in a sector like the cannabis sector, which is very new, understanding who's going to buy the product instead of just putting up a 250 million rand project and have it be a white elephant. It's important for us to be clear as business people, where is this product going to go and what's going to actually be paying for that investment, whether it's land bank, a DFI, or the Lesotho government. Any of those institutions need to be repaid as well as the shareholders. And in that, really being clear about what product are we selling, who are we selling it to, and really those are the fundamentals of any capital raise and business case development.
Question from Sibasisa there, and I'm not sure how closely it's going to align with this particular webinar, but I'd like to just throw it out there. Are you making any assumptions around THC oil prices over the next couple of years?
So I think THC as a general is a tough sector to quite peg at this stage. As Shubir mentioned, we've had extensive market research done by Prohibition Partners specifically for this project, and there is the oil prices. I think we'll get a better sense over the next few years as the market matures. Zara indicated earlier in her section that there are regulatory, market, social dynamics that create a certain that create certain pressures on the market, or rather that create uncertainties of the market channels, distribution channels, etc. And I think those will become clearer as time goes on. Again, the cannabis sector is new. It does require investors who are willing to stay the par and understand that it is a moving and evolving sector. It's certainly not a sector where pricing is known, and neither is product specification known to a T.
Then a question, is there any currency risk associated with your business model at the moment, considering that it will be looking at export-based business? Is there any currency risk and is there any hedging that's going to be taking place?
Yeah, so with regards to exchange rate risk, look, there's always exchange rate risk in a project where, you know, in country, you're talking about the loti, which is pegged to the South African rand, depending on where our investors come from and what currency they invest with, the relevant risk mitigators and hedges can be put in place to reduce that risk.
Should be a question coming through for you relating to the land specifically. How does the change of purpose of the land affect the local community, and are there any implications for ethical community impact? And then a follow-up to that, are there cultural implications on cannabis cultivation in the area, considering that cannabis is not allowed within the country? Is there anything from a regulatory perspective or land cultivation perspective that you'd like to add there?
All right, I'll start with the former, and I'll hand over the latter to maybe Zara, so she can clarify that quite clearly from regulatory framework. In terms of the land parcel, so part of our application process required that we do an environmental impact assessment study, and we had an engagement with community. The village of the chief was involved. The whole community participated, and the project was actually met very, very warmly by the community, notwithstanding the fact that we've been part of the community for many years, and the people were looking forward to this project purely on the basis that for the job creation elements of it. So we don't really have any challenges with establishment of the facility from your typical. You must understand that it's a rural-based area, and therefore the framework around building permit analysis, our architects and teams have engaged with local councils, and we've received everything necessary to get the project up and going. Zara, could you maybe handle the issue around the framework, regulatory framework?
Yeah, sure. So look, with regards to, if you just look at the cannabis markets in Lesotho, and I did touch on it a bit earlier where I said that, you know, Lesotho, in Lesotho, cannabis has been grown for many, many years prior to legalization, the commercialization and legalization there. So yes, one interesting fact is that while cannabis has been legalized in the sense of cultivation for export, it is not legal to cultivate the cannabis in Lesotho and then distribute it locally. It has to be exported. So certainly, you know, there are the rules and regulations in terms of the facility and making sure that the regulations are adhered to in terms of how that is established and making sure that product isn't, you know, making its way out of the doors. But that is the same as it would be just about anywhere else in the world. So, you know, Lesotho is a country that is familiar with cannabis. I don't think there's any issues from a cultural perspective. As Shabir mentioned, the local community is really quite excited. And, you know, this won't be the first cannabis farm in Lesotho. These are not issues that raise a concern in the local environment.
I'm cognizant of, oh, yeah, sorry, Shabir, carry on.
If I just add something small there, quick too. We've also engaged, and this might lead on to the initial question about security around the area. We've engaged with the Lesotho Mounted Police Services and the Commissioner of Police quite closely. The cannabis sector, obviously, it is in its early stages of growth in the country, having 4 operations as we speak. So the police force is undertaking its own assessment in terms of its capacity from elements of security. And what we've agreed in principle with the Commissioner of Police is that we would provide, as part of our development cost, a small police station within less than 1 kilometer from our facility at our cost, just to add an extra security measure. And that was very warmly welcomed by the community because they needed some form of police presence in the area, just as a social element to it, yeah?
Excellent. I'm cognizant of time here, so I'd like to just field one more question before we move on to the partnership element of this. The question's been asked as to whether there has been any discussion or thought around a listing of this particular project or these assets.
Shabir, do you want to take that, or do you want me to
Yeah, look, of course, for us as a group, our first punch at that was that we'd look at it at a later stage if at all the decision was to take it that route. Of course, we have the likes of Nadia and team to give us advice as to which route we can take. But currently, there has been a significant amount of interest to partnerships that don't necessarily require a listing, so to say. So I'm not sure, Nadia, if you have a different view on that.
Yeah, so I think, you know, as a family style business, in terms of founders, currently there isn't a view to necessarily list. Not to say that that wouldn't be an option if the economics and the opportunity at hand made sense. But we are certainly working with Canna-Q to understand those different options and look at that.
Excellent, thank you. I think this then brings us on to this question about the main purpose of this particular webinar, and that relates to how do people get involved? What are the opportunities? Can people engage with the Canna-Q management around what are the options on the table? And with that, I'm going to hand over to Nadia. Have you got some thoughts here?
Great, thank you, Mark. And really to wrap up, it's about partnership. It's been very strong communication from all the shareholders, directors, stakeholders in this project is to say that we're looking for true partnerships, looking to, as Canna-Q, build a significant business of value that brings value to the local economy, and that as shareholders they can be proud of. And in that, it's understanding there are three primary partnership relationships that the shareholders are looking for. One being an off-taker and investor relationship, so combining both elements, but really looking at it from the perspective of both off-takers and investors being highly credible and serious players who have a long-term approach. Again, this is it's a family business, understanding the sector from the perspective of you know, the growth that's going to happen, the shifts that will happen in this market, looking at long-term investor partnerships, off-take partnerships is key. With technical experience, and we're very specific here in saying technical experience, as opposed to purely technical expertise. Again, being a new sector, being a new market, it's extremely important that whichever off-take or investor, whether as a combined effort as per scenario one comes into the partnership with Canna-Q, that they have strong technical experience in the sector. Secondly, we would look at offtake, and we put offtake prior to investors because we believe that with the appropriate offtake and having consistency in the ability and credibility of offtake, we would be in a better position to attract the appropriate investors. But first and foremost in business, you're out there to sell a product. And so we are looking for off-takers that would have established distribution channels, particularly into Europe. And we are looking at bankable off-takers that have credibility behind them, who we can, you know, whose off-take we can invest further into this project with ourselves and to attract additional investors and funders. But very importantly there as well is an off-taker that is growth focused and that is looking at where are the new opportunities within the cannabis sector, whether it be dry flower or extracted product, and ensuring that it's a collaborative market penetration strategy that we can build into and really take the market on strongly with. Where we look at offtake, we are open to discussions around possible brokerage agreements, introductory agreements to possible off-takers. So we're not myopic in our thinking around how we get to offtake. Shabir and the shareholders are flexible in around that, always coming back down to the commercial viability of any such arrangement. And then lastly, where you look at a pure investor, we would not be looking at investors purely for capital. They must be technically sound and have value addition where it comes to access to markets. They may not have offtake themselves, but access to those offtakes is critical. And really looking at investors with a long-term horizon and not a short-term play. And very importantly, is the availability of capital. Currently in the market, we find ourselves, given COVID, given everything else, markets have taken a knock. The availability of capital of credible investors is always a concern where it comes to capital raising, and more so in the environment we find ourselves in. So we are looking for really credible partners that can come in and assist and partner with Canna-Q to become commercially at the forefront of the Lesotho cannabis sector.
Nadia, you've talked a lot about the word, used the word partnership, but maybe just some sense. I mean, one of the questions that's come through there is, there's a mention of 50 licenses having been issued. Is it quite a collaborative environment inside of Lesotho? Are other license holders collaborating, working together, or is it tending to be quite siloed and isolated?
I think like in any sector, you see a bit of everything. You see those who are working collaboratively, and then you do see those who are working in silos. I do believe that it's in part due to being a new sector. A lot of players are holding their cards very close to their chests, and it just comes down to getting to a maturity of the sector. A lot of those licenses that have been issued have not been operationalized nor commercialized. So whilst there's a large number of licenses, very few have the credibility that Canna-Q is. And if I must be biased, I would say none would have the credibility that Canna-Q has at the stage that we're at. So yeah, I think that answers the question there, Mark.
Spoken like a true advisor. Thank you very much. Shabir, anything else you'd like to add from your perspective on that, from that question?
Yeah, maybe. Look, I try to answer it on the chat, Mark. To be honest, understanding the environment in Lesotho, and I think it's important for people who are interested, forget being interested in just Canna-Q. Just a word of advice is that a lot of licenses have been issued to not so credible people, unfortunately. When I say credible, meaning who have not actually been able to even run businesses for all intents and purposes. And therefore, what's happening is that you're having a lot of licenses floating around that are literally being traded. People have managed to rake up the initial fees for setting up licensing and possibly just looking at selling off their licenses. So from the licenses issued from the Ministry of Health, only 4 are operational as we speak. 3 are under construction, meaning are about to, obviously I'm not sure which ends when, but they should be starting soon. And only like 3 additional are at our level. And to be honest, what we've done is having an understanding of we've looked at everything, and I believe our facilities way better designed in terms of various aspects of what has gone wrong with previous developers. But yeah.
Excellent, thank you. We allocated an hour of time for this, and we're pretty much spot on time. I'd like to maybe just ask for some closing comments first from the Uzunzela team and then from Shabir. If there are any follow-up questions, remember the point of this is to have an ongoing engagement with all stakeholders, whether it's media, whether it is the investment teams, whether it is offtake partners. This is really just the start of this engagement. Nadia, Zara, do you guys want to maybe give some closing comments from your side?
Sure. So from my side, really, it's been an amazing journey the past few months in understanding the commercial viability of the Canna-Q business, getting to know the shareholders and the teams that sit around Canna-Q, and I really think that credible partners, credible off-takers, credible investors, have a very powerful local partner with Canna-Q, and we welcome and encourage engagement by getting in touch with us, getting in touch with us through email, etc., and all of the contact details have just been put up. So that's my closing remark. Zara, anything from your side?
No, I just think thank you everyone for joining. I think we've had some nice participation and great questions coming forward. There are some other questions that we haven't had an opportunity to answer today, but we will reach out, and of course, please reach out to us. The email address is there, and ask us your questions. We're happy to engage further. This was a bit of an introduction to the project, so there's a lot more to be discussed where it makes sense to do so. So please do reach out. Keep in mind that Lesotho is a country in the developing world here in Africa, and because I know we've got a lot of people from around the world joining us as well today, and so having a partner like Canna-Q in a project in Lesotho is just immensely valuable. They understand the landscape. They've been doing business there for generations, and I don't think you could ask for a better partner.
Shabir, some closing comments from you?
All right, Mark, for me, to be honest, I just want to thank everybody for making time to join us today. I'm really hoping that we could engage further, as Nadia said, with credible and interested parties who are serious at looking at some form of partnership with us. I believe, without obviously being too sounding as if I'm selling ourselves, but I believe that partnering with Canna-Q gives you really a genuinely credible business partner who's been in operation for in excess of 30 to close to 40 years now in terms of business. So we understand business, and we're looking forward to establishing a profitable venture with some partners in the industry. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, the contact details are all up on the slides there. We will be circulating this and a link to the playback facility. As I mentioned, this is really just the first of many engagements, and we look forward to engaging with you going forward. Thank you very much for your time.